The air changes the moment we step inside. Damp stone breathes out a cold that settles in the bones, thicker and heavier than the night outside. The beam of my torch cuts across the walls that have stood for 7 centuries. As your footsteps are heard echoing close behind mine, they seem too loud for a place this silent. From above us, something slams hard. A door? Maybe. Though no one else is here. The dust drifts from the ceiling in the beam of the light. A recorder hums in your hand with the little red light steady, catching sounds the ear cannot hear. And somewhere in the dark, metal scrapes faintly, like chains drawn slowly across stone. This is Castle Rushen, a fortress born in blood, a prison of fear, a monument of power, punishment and death, left their mark on every wall. And the stories carved into this place did not end when the prisoners were freed or the keys turned in the locks. Tonight, we walk through its history, from kings who raised the walls to the condemned who never left them, from judgment halls to dungeon cells, the whispers that still cling to the stones long after the voices fell silent. If the stories are true, we are not walking alone. Castle Rushen rises from the Isle of Man like a sentinel, its thick walls gripping the coastline against the sea and sky. It began in the 13th century under King Magnus Olafsson, the island's last Norse ruler. He built it not only as a home for power, but as a fortress to assert control over land caught between Norse, Scottish and English ambitions. Every stone laid was meant to endure, to withstand both armies and time itself. Magnus died in 1265, only months after the first towers rose. Some say his passing cast a shadow that never lifted, a weight that settled into the walls. Those who lived here later would speak of unease, of the subtle sense that the fortress was alive with memories it refused to release. Even in those early years, Castle Rushen was a place of extremes. Soldiers stationed along the battlements faced icy winds that howled off the Irish seas. Guards patrolling narrow corridors felt the stone pressing in, hearing footsteps echo where no one walked. The watchmen claimed the shadows shifted, as if aware of their presence. These whispers of unease may have been fleeting, but they were noted again and again in later records, suggesting that even from its birth, the castle held secrets. The design of the fortress reinforced its authority. Towers rose high enough to overlook the surrounding countryside. Narrow arrow slits pierced the thick walls, and gates were reinforced to repel siege engines. Inside, passageways wound tightly, almost like a labyrinth, with storage chambers, guard rooms, and the first rudimentary dungeons. Every detail spoke of control, order, and preparedness for the threats from both outside and from within. The castle's location itself was deliberate. Perched near the harbour, it commanded views of approaching ships and the surrounding town. Its stones absorbed the wind, the salt, and the ceaseless motion of the tide. Soldiers and servants alike would have lived under the constant drum of nature's harshness, a reminder that the fortress, though solid, would never fully shelter them. From the very start, Castle Rushen was more than a collection of walls and towers. It was a monument to power, death, and vigilance. And somewhere within those stones, the first murmurs of its long-shadowed history were already taking root, whispers that would echo through the centuries and survive long after the kings, soldiers, and builders were gone. Castle Rushen grew taller and wider with each passing century. Becoming more than a fortress, it became the beating heart of authority on the Isle of Man. After the Norse kings fell, Scottish lords claimed it, and later the English strengthened it, each leaving an imprint in stone and mortar. Towers rose higher, walls thickened, and gates were enforced against both siege engines and rebellion. Inside life was harsh. Guards patrolled winding corridors for hours, enduring damp stone, cold drafts, and the relentless whistle of wind of the nearby sea. Servants carried torches down narrow passageways, their flickering flames casting long shadows across the rough walls. Food and warmth were scarce, and the ever-present chill made every step a reminder that the fortress was both protector and jailer. From the battlements, sentries would spot approaching ships long before they reached the harbour, but even with this advantage, unease often crept in. Chronographers of the time noted guards hearing footsteps echoing in the empty halls, doors groaning without cause, and shadows that seemed to linger even when the sun shone. Some avoided the western wall entirely, claiming the air felt heavier, colder, as if the stones themselves were watching. Military incidents left their mark too. The Scottish attempted to assert influence over the island, and English garrisons stationed within the castle brought tension and the occasional skirmish. Every reinforcement of the walls, every new arrow slit, every tower added to the fortress's dominance, but also to its weight, as if each stone carried the memories of those who served and suffered inside. The fortress was designed to command obedience and instill fear, but power alone could not contain the whispers that travelled through the stones. The shadows of past lives seemed to press against the walls, the chill lingering in certain corridors. And as the castle expanded, it began to trap not only power but the consequences of it. Those who fell afoul of authority, those who were confined, watched or punished. At this early stage, Castle Rushen's reputation for unease was forming. The walls were no longer simply protection from armies, they were a counter for fear, memory, and something unspoken. The echoes of these centuries would grow louder in the chambers below, where the fortress's most notorious roles awaited. By the 16th century, Castle Rushen had taken on a darker purpose. Its towers and walls were no longer only a symbol of authority, they became prisons, holding those accused of crimes, dissenters, and the occasional political enemy. The dungeons were cramped, damp, and cold, with ceilings low enough to bend, and walls that seemed to trap both sound and despair. Prisoners survived on meagre rations, the echo of dripping water marking the endless days and nights. Accounts from later historians and visitors describe the conditions in stark terms. Chains hung from the walls and rings embedded in the stone used to restrain those deemed dangerous. The air was heavy with moisture and the metallic tang of iron. Guards noted that even when the cells were empty, the cold seemed to linger longer than it should, and some spoke of faint sounds, chains scraping the stone, whispers carried on the draught, and footsteps where none should be. Among the recorded prisoners was Eleanor Cobb, accused of witchcraft in the late 17th century. Though the details are scarce, stories tied to her name lingered, repeated by those visiting the castle centuries later. She became one of the earliest figures linked to the castle's enduring reputations for apparitions. Her spirit, later named the Lady in White, some had claimed had been seen drifting silently through the dungeons and corridors. The castle's architecture amplified the sense of confinement. Narrow stairways led to multiple tiers of cells, often stacked above one another, so that every shout or scream seemed to echo endlessly. Guards reported that the more they walked these corridors, the heavier the air became, as if the walls absorbed the suffering within and held it close. Visitors in the later centuries corroborated these reports, claiming cold spots and fleeting shadows that defied explanation. By the end of the 18th century, Castle Rushen had earned its reputation, not only as a prison, but as a place haunted by the very memories of its incarcerated souls. Every stone in the lower chambers bore witness to punishment, and the whispers of the past, the scraping of the chains, and the cold drafts became the earliest documented threads of the paranormal fabric that would wrap the castle for centuries to come. As Castle Rushen emerged from its prison years, it transformed once more, this time into a seat of governance. The House of Keys, the island's parliament, convened within its walls, bringing voices of authority and debate into chambers long marked by the echoes of suffering. The castle's corridors, once filled with cries of the condemned, now carried the measured tones of discussion, negotiation, and lawmaking. Despite this shift, the shadows remained. Those attending Parliament spoke of flickering torches along hallways that had not been lit, of doors moving slightly no hand had touched. The chronographers recorded that some members were uneasy in certain rooms, the air feeling inexplicably heavy, their voices faltering as though the stone itself was listening. The very chambers meant for reason and order seemed to retain memories of fear and punishment, whispering faintly to anyone who paused too long. The castle continued to dominate the surrounding town from its hilltop perch. From the battlements, the view stretched over the harbour and the countryside beyond. The stones absorbed the voice of lawmakers, yet they also carried the murmurs of the past, the prisoners who had walked the corridors, the guards who had feared the walls, the stories of Eleanor Cobb, and others whose names persisted long after their deaths. Even as governance replaced imprisonment, Castle Rushen's history of confinement and suffering remained palpable. Visitors and historians alike noted the chill that sometimes ran through the halls. Shadows seemed to linger at the edge of vision, and a pervasive sense that the castle listened and remembered. In these chambers of power, whispers of the past blended with the voices of the present, and the fortress maintained its role as both witness and participant in the life of the island. By the end of the 18th century, Castle Rushen had become a place of duality, a centre of authority and a keeper of memories that would not be silenced. The walls held both law and legacy, reason of unease. By the end of the 18th century, Castle Rushen had become a place of duality, a centre of authority and a keeper of memories that would not be silenced. The walls held both law and legacy, reason and unease, preparing the stage for the stories that would emerge during its restoration and the reports of restless spirits that would follow. By the late 18th century, Castle Rushen had begun to feel the weight of its own history. The walls, thick and unyielding, pressed back against anyone who walked the corridors. Damp stone exhaled cold, seeping into bones as though the fortress remembered every footstep, every cry, every whisper that had ever echoed within. The dungeons below were empty now, but the air remained heavy with the memory of confinement. Visitors noted chains scraping along the walls when no one was near. The sound so faint it was almost imagined, yet impossible to ignore. Cold drafts moved against the current of the air, slipping down passageways, brushing shoulders, and curling around the corners as though the castle itself breathed. Shadows clung to the edges of vision, darker than the absence of light, lingering just long enough to provoke a second glance. Torches flickered for no reason, throwing walls into shapes that seemed almost human, almost alive. Some who walked these walls later claimed the sensation of being followed, or of something brushing past them in silence, leaving behind only a chill and the faint echo of a chain sliding across the stone. The fortress had begun to decay, yet its memories had grown stronger. The cries of prisoners, the whispered commands of guards, the quiet sobs of those waiting judgment, they did not fade. They lingered in the stone, in the cold, in the silence that pressed so heavily it was almost sound. By the time restoration began, Castle Rushen was less of a structure than a vessel of its own past. And though the workmen and historians who entered its chambers could see only stone and timber, many could not deny what others had long claimed. That the castle remembered, and its memories were restless. The 19th and 20th centuries brought a new chapter to Castle Rushen: restoration. Walls that had stood for centuries began to be repaired, roofs reinforced, and stonework stabilized. Yet even as labourers repaired the fortress, the whispers of its past could not be silenced. Workmen reported footsteps on the stairs that led nowhere, chains rattling in empty dungeons, and cold drafts that snaked through the corridors regardless of the weather. Torches flickering inexplicably, and shadows shifted at the edges of vision once more, leaving shapes that felt almost human before dissolving into the stone. These were not mere stories. Historians and visitors noted the occurrences repeatedly, passing them along in the journals and reported over decades. The castle, though restored, had accumulated the memories of centuries. Prisoners confined in the dark cells, guards patrolling in fear, political figures debating above chambers once filled with cries. It was as if every voice, every step, every whisper had been absorbed into the stones, and now whispered back. Some visitors reported sensations that could not be explained, the sudden weight and presence in empty rooms, the feeling of being watched, the fleeting glimpses of figures moving in the peripheral vision. Guides and staff often avoided certain cells, recounting stories of workers who refused to enter the dungeons after dark, claiming a presence lingered there. Even during daylight, the castle's aura was undeniable. The cold seemed sharper, the shadows deeper, and the silence heavier in places with the most layered histories. The dungeons, the guard rooms, the upper chambers where debates had once raged. Those who walked its corridors could sense the accumulated weight of suffering and authority alike. Castle Rushen had transformed from a fortress and a prison into a historical monument, yet it remained a vessel for its past. Restoration may have returned it to a state of structural integrity, but it could not erase the presence of the centuries it had witnessed. For those unattuned to the whispers of history, the spirits of the past remained palpable, waiting as if the castle itself remembered every footstep and every cry. Castle Rushen stands today as a testament to Isle of Man's tumultuous past and a fortress that has witnessed centuries of power, suffering, and relentless march of time. But beneath the stone walls and restored facades, the echo of its history is lingering, and the shadows of its past refuse to fade. Even after its restoration, Castle Rushen has not shed its haunted reputation. Visitors and staff alike have reported inexplicable occurrences that defy logical explanation. Cold spots in the dungeons, the sensation of being watched in the corridors, and a distinct sound of chains dragging across the stone floors when no one is near. These are just a few of the eerie experiences that have been documented. One of the most enduring legends is that of the White Lady. In the 1950s, Brian Sofer recounted an encounter with the spectral figure during the visit to the castle with his sister. As they explored the dimly lit halls, his sister suddenly stopped, her face pale with fear. She had seen a woman in white, her form flickering like a candle flame drifting silently through the corridor. Brian felt a sudden chill as the apparition passed by, leaving a lingering sense of unease that has stayed with them for decades. Another prominent figure in the castle's ghostly lore is the Grey Lady, believed to be the ghost of the former Lady Isabella Shaw. In the 16th century, Lady Isabella was reportedly involved in a forbidden love affair with a servant. When their relationship was discovered, she was walled up alive in a hidden chamber as punishment. Her anguished cries were said to echo through the castle before they ceased, and it is her sorrowing spirit that is said to be haunting the halls to this day. In 1960s, a group of boys exploring the castle's Eagle Tower reported seeing a phantom soldier. The figure was described as wearing a headdress and dark hands, standing motionless before disappearing into the thin air. Local legends suggest that this apparition is the spirit of a soldier who met a tragic end within the castle walls. Castle Rushen's haunted reputation is not merely the stuff of legend, it is rooted in the very fabric of its history. The castle has served as a prison, a place of execution, and a site of political intrigue. The suffering and injustices that have occurred within its walls have left an indelible mark, and many believe that the spirits of those who endured such hardships continue to linger. As we conclude the journey through Castle Rushen, we are reminded that history is not just a series of dates and events. It is the stories of those who lived and died within the walls. The spirits that haunt Castle Rushen are not mere phantoms, they are the echoes of the past, seeking to be remembered.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed the story, please give this video a like. It helps the shadows gather and the whispers spread. Drop a comment below and tell me what country you're watching from. I'd love to know where our watchers dwell. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're striving to bring the cult together, and our first 100 subscribers are the beginning of something extraordinary. And remember, the cult loves you.